Welcome to Public Safety Talk Radio, the podcast for all of our heroes in public safety, including law enforcement professionals, firefighters, EMTs, corrections officers, healthcare workers, and more. The show is produced by the POCUA and is founded upon its Soundness initiative. This episode is sponsored by Podcast Magazine. Podcast Magazine is the preeminent podcast publication focused on taking leaders beyond the microphone and into the lives of today's leading podcasters and behind the scenes of the shows fans love. Hi, I'm Ken Bator, your host for Public Safety Talk Radio, and this is our special Veterans Day episode, and a thank you to all veterans out there, especially since we know that a lot of our public safety professionals are former military, whether they're police officers, firefighters, EMTs, ER workers, corrections officers, FBI. I can go on and on and on. We have a lot of our proud veterans that are working in those roles and still providing service to us in a lot of different ways. So I wanted to make sure that with tomorrow being Veterans Day, that we give and show our appreciation for those veterans, and also give some resources for veterans and all public safety professionals on this particular special week where we honor those veterans. First off, I do want to say I appreciate your service to all veterans out there. And I say that specifically rather than saying thank you for your service. Not having served personally in the military or as a public safety professional, just somebody that does respect the work that you do and what you do for all of us. I've become aware by some of my military and police officer friends that although it may very well be sincere, when we say thank you for your service, sometimes that falls a little bit short. As one military member mentioned to me, is that it actually irks him a little bit. And actually, which is one podcast that I'll talk about in a little while, War Stories, which is for police officers, veterans, firefighters, military, and so forth. They actually mention in episode 1 of their podcast, they say, well, when you're thanking me for your service, then, what are you really thanking me for? Do you even know what we do? Which is a good point. And in that episode, I know somebody said, do you even know what we do? And do you even care to learn? And I will say personally, I probably don't know everything that you do, although I may be more familiar with it than some other civilians out there because of the work that I do in the law enforcement and public safety space. But I will say sincerely, I do care about learning about it. When I hear your stories, when I hear the issues with PTSD, and many of the other factors that come along with being in and having been in the military, I can sincerely say I do care, and I do want to learn, and I do want to help where I can, which is what I hope will happen with this episode, because I want to point out a few things. One, you may ask, why is Podcast Magazine the sponsor of our Veterans Day special episode of Public Safety Talk Radio? And I want to specifically point out that they just came out with a Veterans Day edition for their November issue of Podcast Magazine, and they did a piece on the top 25 podcast. In fact, I will pull it up right here. For those of you that are on the audio version, you can certainly find this in the Podcast Magazine. They're still offering free digital subscriptions to the Podcast Magazine. For the physical magazine, you do have to buy a subscription. But if you go to Podcast Magazine, or if you're on the video version of this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio, you will see the graphic up here that Podcast Magazine did a piece on the best veteran hosted podcast out there. They picked the top 25, and three of them that I want to point out specifically. They're all terrific podcasts, and you should certainly listen to all of them if you have the inclination. But one of them I mentioned, War Stories. It is ranked as the 25th on here. I would probably rank it a little bit higher, not to disparage any of the 24 other podcasts on this list, just simply saying that War Stories is one podcast I've just begun to listen to, and I think it's phenomenal. Hopefully, we will be able to get the hosts of that show on this show to provide some perspective. Some may remember that I am the true crime category director for Podcast Magazine. And given the fact that War Stories does fall under the true crime category, I'm definitely reaching out to them for a feature in the magazine, because I do believe that many podcast listeners out there need to learn more about that specific podcast and what they do. So definitely check out War Stories. A lot of fun too, in terms of the fact that they joke a little bit, and as they talk about too, and this is true for our veterans as well. Sometimes they laugh and have what's called gallows humor at some very tough and gruesome stories out there. And they do that because emotionally that helps them cope with having seen and experienced some of those tragic events. As some people have said to me, and I've heard on War Stories as well, if we don't laugh about it, we'll cry about it. And sometimes they do that as well, and that's certainly acceptable. But when you hear veterans make light or laugh about a heavy story or situation, doesn't mean that they're taking it lightly. It just means that that's how they're dealing with it emotionally. But two other podcasts on these great 25 veteran podcasts out here that I do want to mention. Number 5 is the Kingdom Crossroads podcast with Robert Thibodeau. Many of you will remember that he was one of the earlier guests on Public Safety Talk Radio. So I encourage you, he's got a wealth of knowledge as a veteran and as a retired police officer. So certainly listen to that episode with Robert Thibodeau. I will put it in the show notes. But just as important, listen to his podcast, the Kingdom Crossroads podcast. He does an excellent show. And I know veterans and folks that aren't in the military will enjoy that particular program. The last podcast that I want to make specific mention of here on Veterans Day week, if you will, is Life Transformation Radio, done by Sean Douglas. Sean Douglas is currently active Air Force. I understand that he will be retiring soon, but he gives a wealth of knowledge. And I love the approach that he takes with Life Transformation Radio, in that he really does provide help and healing through that show. Those that have listened to that show will know that he is a suicide survivor. You understand that he understands, and can certainly provide some help and guidance for all veterans out there. So I wholeheartedly recommend all 25 of those podcasts, but definitely those 3 that I mentioned. And speaking of suicide survivor and the resources that are out there, I also want to make specific mention. You probably heard me mention this on this show before, but one of our public safety partners in the Police Officers Credit Union Association is an organization called Serve and Protect. What they do is they provide trauma services to all public safety professionals as well as medical professionals. They offer what they call 360 care. And you can find them at simply www.serveprotect.org. I will put that in the show notes as well. As they say, sometimes 911 needs 911. And since 2011, Serve and Protect has been facilitating trauma services for public safety professionals struggling with invisible wounds, emotional scars from traumatic incidents from the job. To date, they've helped about 5,000 heroes, and they provide real solutions for real problems. They're a 501c3 nonprofit corporation out of the Nashville area, and they facilitate these trauma services 24/7 through their hotline. If you go to serveandprotect.org, you'll find videos, you'll find resources. They have a 24/7 crisis line. That crisis line is 615-373-8000. Again, that's 615-373-8000. And I know that our veterans sometimes are dealing with issues, and Serve and Protect can help. If, God forbid, you're contemplating suicide, you're in an emotional crisis, and need immediate help because of addictions, depression, anger issues, domestic violence, or other significant issues, call their 24/7 crisis line, powered by Safe Call Now. When you call, their Safe Call Now crisis line partner, peer advocates, will assess your need and connect you with the appropriate level of care. If residential care is best, they will facilitate that process with one of their care partners. But the main point is if you're a veteran, you're a public safety professional, and you need that help is out there. Whether you call Serve and Protect or another provider, we're certainly not advertising for Serve and Protect, but if you need that help, that is one of the great resources that you have out there. Again, a sincere, I appreciate your service to all the veterans out there, and especially all the veterans that continue your service as a public safety professional. I can't give the emotion enough to tell you how much I appreciate you. We appreciate you, not only at this time here, the day before Veterans Day, as this particular episode is going live, but every day of the year. Especially this year has been a very, very difficult one, and I wish you the best. God bless you for everything that you've done for this country, and look to those resources, whether it's Serve and Protect, or possibly one of those podcasts. I think that they'll help. I think that they'll give you some guidance, and I think that you'll have some fun with it as well. And then what's wrong with having a little bit of fun? So again, I appreciate all the service that veterans have given to our country. Thank you for either watching or listening to this episode of Public Safety Talk Radio, and we'll be with you again next week with another great episode. Take care. Happy Veterans Day. Public Safety Talk Radio is produced by the POCUA. POCUA is a consortium of financial institutions serving law enforcement as well as other first responders and public safety professionals. To learn more about our association and to find one of our credit unions or service providers near you, go to www.policecreditunions.com. And always remember, if you aren't working with one of our POCUA credit unions, you're just banking with an institution that just so happens to serve first responders. As a public safety professional, you and your family deserve better. Find a POCUA credit union today.